Lowly employee accused of theft, but his secret camera exposed the entire management team. The first thing they stole from Marcus wasn't the money. It was his dignity. In less than a minute, his name was smeared across the company's internal network. Marcus Turner, facilities assistant, caught stealing company property. And he hadn't even clocked in yet. Marcus had worked at Garrison and Price Technologies for 8 years. 8 years of cleaning up after executives who barely acknowledged him. 8 years of polishing glass walls and picking up carelessly tossed coffee cups. But today, standing in front of human resources with 2 security guards behind him, he realized none of that mattered now. He could already hear the whispers outside the frosted glass door. Man of all people, always the quiet ones. The HR manager, a woman named Celia Grant, sat across from Marcus with her arms folded tight, as if she were holding herself together. "Marcus," she said carefully, "we found footage from the security feed last night. It shows someone entering the inventory room after hours. That person looks a lot like you." Marcus felt his throat close. "I didn't steal anything," he said, voice flat. "Not begging. Just stating a fact." Celia's eyes flicked down to the folder on her desk, where 2 printed photos sat. Blurry, black and white. A figure in a gray uniform, not unlike his, pulling something from a shelf. "This isn't a criminal case yet," Celia said. "But we have a zero-tolerance policy. We're going to have to ask you to hand over your badge and keys." It wasn't until he stepped outside, under the cold fluorescent lights of the parking garage, that Marcus let his shoulders slump. His phone buzzed in his pocket. His wife, probably. But he couldn't face her yet. Not until he figured this out. He hadn't stolen anything. But he knew exactly who had. Because Marcus had seen things. Over the years, subtle things. Unmarked boxes being carried into private elevators. Locked storage rooms no one talked about. Shredded documents left in the trash instead of the secure bins. They thought he was invisible. But Marcus Turner noticed everything. And 2 weeks ago, when he first suspected something bigger was going on, he'd done something unusual. He bought a small, hidden camera. One of those gadgets sold in bulk online, cheap, but good enough. He'd hidden it in the janitor's closet, angled perfectly toward the corridor where the inventory room sat. He just hadn't checked the footage yet. Now he had a reason. Back at his apartment's small, 2-bedroom, barely enough space for him, his wife, and their daughter, Marcus locked himself in the bedroom and powered up his old laptop. The camera had a direct Wi-Fi feed. Took a minute to load. When it finally did, his stomach dropped. There they were. 3 men in expensive suits. Not janitors. Not night staff. Real upper-level executives. And right at the center of them, Patrick Drayton, the chief financial officer. Marcus watched in silence as Patrick keyed into the inventory room, filled 2 black duffel bags with equipment, and walked out laughing. Marcus stared at the screen. 8 years of being overlooked. 8 years of holding his head down. It all ended here. The next morning, Marcus didn't go to work. He went to the local precinct. It was a long shot, but he figured maybe, just maybe, someone would listen. Detective Aisha Bell met him in interview room 3. She was younger than he expected. Mid-30s maybe, sharp eyes behind rimless glasses. "You brought evidence?" she asked, skeptical. Marcus placed the laptop on the table and clicked play. 5 minutes later, her expression changed. From bored professionalism to something colder, more serious. "This isn't petty theft," she said. "That equipment's worth hundreds of thousands." Marcus let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "But why frame you?" Aisha asked, frowning. Marcus shrugged. "Because I'm easy. Black janitor. Low level. No one questions it." Her face tightened. It wasn't pity. It was anger. "We're going to need to move carefully," she said. "You might have just blown open something big." For the next few days, Marcus lived in a kind of limbo. The company didn't contact him. His badge access was revoked. Friends at work stopped answering texts. But every night, he reviewed more footage. And every night, he found more. Different executives. Different nights. Different stolen goods. What Marcus didn't know yet was that the situation was even deeper than he'd guessed. Because Garrison and Price wasn't just stealing from itself. They were laundering equipment for off-the-books government contracts. Illegal tech. Devices meant for surveillance sold to private buyers overseas. And Marcus had just become the one man who could prove it. By the end of the week, Detective Bell brought him in again. This time, not to the small interview room, but to a larger office. "We're opening a formal investigation," she said. "Federal level. Your footage is solid." Marcus felt his knees go weak. "But," Bell added, "you'll need to testify. You'll need to go on record. You ready for that?" He wasn't sure. His wife had begged him to leave it alone. "You have a family," she said. "They could come after you." But Marcus had spent too long swallowing his pride. Too long pretending the world was fairer than it really was. "I'm ready," he said. And just like that, the quiet janitor no one noticed became the key to bringing down an empire. 2 weeks later, Marcus Turner stood in a suit that didn't quite fit, inside a towering federal building downtown. The courtroom smelled like old paper and disinfectant. Rows of dark wooden benches stretched behind him, filled with faces he didn't recognize. Government men, journalists, lawyers with expensive pens. At the front of the room, Patrick Drayton sat between two federal marshals, wearing the same smug expression he always had in the office. Marcus's palms were sweating as he waited for the bailiff to call him up. His wife, Renee, sat in the second row, holding their daughter's hand tight. Her eyes were red. She hadn't wanted him here, but she was here now. When his name echoed through the room, Marcus felt the weight of it. He stepped up, took the oath, and sat down in the witness chair. The prosecutor, a woman named Leslie Chow, stepped forward. Calm, collected, no nonsense. "Mr. Turner," she began, voice steady, "please tell the court your occupation." I was a facilities assistant at Garrison and Price Technologies," Marcus said. His voice echoed louder than he expected. "For 8 years." Leslie nodded. "And how did you first become aware of irregular activities within your workplace?" Marcus took a breath. "I noticed things. For months. Things out of place. Rooms locked that weren't supposed to be. And then," he glanced toward the defense table. Patrick didn't flinch. "Then I was accused of stealing." There was a low murmur from the crowd. The judge rapped the gavel lightly. Leslie stepped closer. "Mr. Turner, to your knowledge, did you in fact steal anything from Garrison and Price?" "No," Marcus said, and he made sure everyone heard him. "Instead, what did you do?" "I set up a hidden camera. I recorded the hallway where I worked. That's how I caught them." Leslie clicked a button on her laptop. A large monitor flickered on behind her. Grainy footage played Marcus's footage. There was Patrick Drayton, plain as day, hauling 2 black duffel bags through the corridor. The courtroom went quiet as stone. For the next hour, Marcus answered every question. Step by step, he laid out exactly how the executives had framed him, how he'd gone to the police, and how the investigation had unfolded. By the end of it, his throat felt raw. But he wasn't finished yet. Leslie leaned in for her final question. "Mr. Turner, there's been speculation about why you were chosen as the scapegoat. In your own words, why do you think that happened?" Silence. Everyone waited. Marcus stared straight at Patrick before answering. "Because I was invisible," he said. "Because of my job. Because of my skin." The words hung in the air like smoke. And just like that, the story wasn't just about stolen equipment anymore. It was about something bigger. After court adjourned for the day, Marcus stepped outside into the blinding sun. Reporters swarmed immediately, cameras and microphones shoved into his face. But he ignored them. All he cared about was seeing Renee and their daughter, Ava, waiting near the courthouse steps. "Daddy, did you win?" Ava asked. Marcus knelt down, gripping her small hand. "Not yet, baby," he said. "But we're getting there." That night, back at home, the news reports began to hit. Janitor exposes corporate scandal. Facilities worker uncovers millions in stolen tech. From invisible to indispensable. The Marcus Turner Story. Renee sat next to him on the couch, eyes wide as she flipped between channels. "You really did it," she whispered. Marcus didn't answer. Not because he wasn't proud, but because the weight of it was still sinking in. He'd spent years believing things would never change. Now he wasn't sure what came next. The trial lasted 3 months. Testimonies, counter-testimonies, financial documents, federal agents combing through years of records. Marcus went back to the stand twice. Each time he was sharper, clearer, less afraid. The defense tried everything. They claimed the footage was fake, that Marcus had doctored it, that he had a grudge. But none of it stuck, because the truth had weight now, and Marcus wasn't the only one carrying it. By the end of the trial, 6 Garrison and Price executives were indicted. The company's stock tanked. Federal investigators promised sweeping reforms. But for Marcus, none of that mattered as much as what happened on the final day. When the jury foreman stood and read the verdict, "Guilty," Marcus felt Renee's hand grip his arm. He didn't smile, didn't cheer. He just closed his eyes and breathed. It was over. A month later, Marcus was invited back to Garrison and Price. Not to clean, to speak. The company, or what was left of it, had been forced to implement new oversight, new policies, diversity and ethics committees. And they wanted Marcus to stand in front of a crowd of new hires and tell his story. He wore a new suit this time, tailored, sharp. As he stepped onto the stage, Marcus looked out over the faces in the crowd. Young, old, black, white, brown. And he started the same way he always had. "My name is Marcus Turner," he said, voice steady through the mic. "And I used to be invisible." The room was silent. "But I learned something. If you let people pretend you don't exist, eventually they'll believe it. And worse, so will you." He paused. "Let it sink in. That's why I set up that camera. That's why I stood up in court. Not just to save myself, but because nobody else would." The applause afterward wasn't thunderous, but it was real. Later, as he left the building, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the glass doors. Same face, same eyes. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't just the janitor anymore. The next phase of Marcus Turner's life wasn't marked by fame, or wealth, or revenge. It was marked by choice. Because once the story broke nationally, Marcus wasn't just a man with a hidden camera anymore. He was a symbol. Television networks called. Book agents emailed. Speaking tours were offered. But none of that felt real to him until one morning, when a black SUV pulled up in front of his apartment. 2 men in navy suits stepped out. They weren't police. They weren't reporters. They were from the Department of Justice. Marcus met them on the sidewalk, feeling out of place in his plain clothes and worn sneakers. "Mr. Turner," the taller man said, offering a hand. "I'm Agent Whitaker. This is Agent Ruiz. We'd like to talk." Marcus glanced back at his front door where Renee stood, arms crossed, watching nervously. "About what?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice even. "About a program," Whitaker said. "One that could use someone like you." They didn't say more until Marcus was seated in a quiet downtown office, a cold bottle of water sweating on the table in front of him. Whitaker leaned forward, fingers laced. "You understand how rare your situation is, right?" Marcus just shrugged. A civilian, zero background in law enforcement, successfully gathering evidence that leads to multiple federal indictments? Whitaker continued. "That's not just rare. It's unheard of." "So what are you saying?" Marcus asked, skeptical. "You want me to be a spy now?" Ruiz smiled slightly. "Not quite. What they proposed wasn't a job exactly. More like a contract. Consultation on internal investigations. Anti-corruption cases. They wanted Marcus's perspective. His insight. Because what Marcus had proven wasn't just that corruption existed. He'd proven that the people closest to it, the invisible people, noticed things professionals missed. He'd been the janitor, the background noise, and that had made him more effective than 100 cameras. "I'm no cop," Marcus said slowly. "We know," Whitaker said. That's the point. For the first time since the trial ended, Marcus felt that same quiet pulse of adrenaline. Not fear, not anger, purpose. By the time he left the building, he had a non-disclosure agreement in his pocket, and a decision to make. That night, Marcus sat on the fire escape outside his apartment, watching the city lights below. Renee joined him after a while, pulling her sweater tight against the chill. "You going to take it?" she asked softly. Marcus didn't answer right away. "I keep thinking about what happens if I don't," he said finally. "If I just go back to pretending none of this happened." Renee rested her head against his shoulder. "You don't owe them anything, you know? You already did your part." "I know," Marcus said. "But maybe there's more." Renee was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "As long as you come home at the end of the day, that's all I care about." Marcus smiled. "Always." The first case Marcus worked on through the DOJ wasn't as dramatic as Garrison and Price. It was smaller, a government subcontractor skimming off military contracts. But the process was familiar now. He wore a badge. He walked hallways not as a janitor but as a consultant, an investigator, and people still underestimated him. At first he resented that, but then he realized it was his greatest strength. They still looked right past him. And that's when he caught them. Months passed. Cases closed. Marcus built a quiet reputation in the Justice Department as someone who could see things no one else saw. But it wasn't until a year after the trial that he came full circle. Renee had gotten a new job herself accounting at a local nonprofit. Ava was growing fast, already asking questions about colleges. And Marcus found himself walking into an event hall uptown. It was a company gala. Garrison and Price, under new management, had invited him as a guest of honor. The hall was sleek, full of glass and metal, new faces, new rules, and right near the entrance was a plaque. In plain black letters, the Marcus Turner Ethics and Oversight Committee, dedicated to transparency, equity, and justice. Marcus stood there for a long minute, reading it over and over. A voice interrupted him. "Hell of a thing, isn't it?" He turned. It was Celia Grant, the same HR manager who had once called him into that cold conference room, telling him he was fired. She looked older now, softer. "I never said it back then," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." Marcus nodded once. That was enough. They stood in silence for a moment, watching new employees file past. And then Celia added, "You changed everything here, you know?" Marcus didn't answer. He just kept looking at the plaque. Because it wasn't about changing everything. It was about making sure no one else ever had to stand in front of a locked office door, holding a cardboard box of their life, knowing no one believed them. Later that night, as the gala wound down, Marcus found himself on the balcony overlooking the city. The skyline glittered. Cars streamed below like rivers of light. A young man approached him, maybe 25, wearing a Garrison and Price ID badge. "Nervous?" "Mr. Turner?" the man asked. "I just wanted to say, what you did. It means something." Marcus studied him. "What's your job here?" "Facilities assistant," the young man said. And he smiled, a little embarrassed. Marcus smiled back. "Good," he said, because it wasn't just about taking down bad people. It was about making sure the good ones were seen. And for the first time, Marcus Turner wasn't invisible anymore. He was exactly where he was meant to be. 12 years later, Marcus Turner stood in front of a classroom. The air smelled of dry erase markers and coffee. Rows of college students watched him with quiet focus, notebooks open, some recording on their phones. On the screen behind him, Ethics and Oversight in Modern Corporate Structures. Guest lecturer, Marcus Turner. His voice carried steady, now smoother, practiced but never rehearsed. "So here's the real question," Marcus said. "What do you do when nobody's watching? When no camera's pointed at you? No reporter, no boss, just you and the decision in front of you?" He let the question hang there for a beat. Then he told them, "You do the right thing anyway." After class, a student waited at the front. a young black woman with sharp eyes and a worn backpack. She introduced herself as Chimera. "Sir, I just wanted to say, my father told me about you," she said. "He worked janitorial at Clyburn Industries. Said your story kept him going some nights." Marcus smiled gently. "That means more than you know." Chimera hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever regret it? Blowing the whistle, I mean." Marcus thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No," he said, "because when it's your name on the line, you find out real quick. It's not about keeping quiet. It's about deciding who you want to be remembered as." That evening, Marcus walked home through the city. Things had changed since his days pushing a mop bucket. For one, people recognized him now. Not like a celebrity, more like respect. At the corner of 48th and Lewis, a mural stretched across a building's wall. It wasn't fancy, spray paint and brush strokes. But there he was, Marcus Turner, captured mid-step, holding a security camera in one hand. Below the image, in big bold letters, "Some heroes don't wear suits. Some just show up." He stopped and stared at it for a long time. Not because of vanity, but because somewhere in that crowd, 12 years ago, there might have been another janitor. Another Marcus Turner, watching and wondering if anyone would believe them. That night, over dinner, Renee asked him what he was thinking about. Ava was grown, now finishing grad school. Renee had started her own bookkeeping business. Their apartment was bigger, brighter. "I was thinking about back then," Marcus said. "When it all started." Renee smiled. "Feels like a different life." It was. There was a knock at the door. Marcus stood, expecting a neighbor or a delivery. Instead, two unfamiliar faces waited outside. A young white man in a DOJ jacket. A middle-aged woman in a suit. "Mr. Turner?" the woman asked. "We're sorry to drop in like this, but we were hoping you could consult on something." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Something new. Something big," the man said quietly. "Bigger than anything we've handled before. And we could use your eyes on it." For a brief second, Marcus felt that pulse again. That quiet hum of purpose. He glanced back at Renee. She was already watching him with that same patient, knowing look. "I'll get my coat," Marcus said. Hours later, as Marcus stepped into a nondescript federal building, file folders waiting on a table in front of him, he paused. There was a small mirror on the wall. He caught his reflection there, older now. Lines on his face, gray in his beard, but still the same man. A man who once stood in a break room, accused of theft, carrying nothing but the truth and a hidden camera. A man who learned the hard way that the system wasn't built to see him until he made it impossible to look away. And as he opened the first file, glancing at the faces, the dates, the numbers, he didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just got to work. Because some battles end. But the fight to be seen, to be heard, to be counted never does. Not really. And Marcus Turner wasn't invisible anymore. Not now. Not ever again.